And we are live. Welcome to the second episode of Podcast Portugal. I'm absolutely honored here today to be with my good friend, guest, Pedro Rocha. Welcome, Pedro. Great to see you all the way there in New Zealand.
Thanks, Justin.
Podcast Portugal is set up to talk everything about Portugal to the English-speaking world. So we've had lots of dealings in the past with property. Always been really, really happy with your company's work and the customer service. And I thought it would be excellent to talk to you about some of the interesting things about the property world, and also indeed living in a different country and moving. In fact, you've done it the other way around. You've left Portugal and moved to New Zealand, and many people are either coming from New Zealand or coming from the US or wherever and moving to Portugal. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So let's first introduce to our audience who you are.
So I'm Pedro Rocha. I'm 43 years old. I was born in Porto, actually in the north of Portugal. And when I was around 17, I was surfing, and I went for the first time to Algesur, and I just felt completely in love with the coastline. And so with a girlfriend that I had at the time that was going there since she was like 5 years old. Yeah, and I just fell in love, and I was going through a phase of starting university, but just wanting to travel and see the world. But every time I went to Algesur and the southwest of the Algarve, I just felt like that sense of adventure and travel in my own country. So I put it in my head to move there one day, and that happened. So I'm originally from Porto, and then around when I went there for the first time when I was 17, and then when I was 24 years old, I moved down to Algesur, and I lived there until 2 years ago. And then I spent 1 year in Madeira Island developing a project and also having a life experience. And now I'm currently in New Zealand. I own the company Guthrie Rocha Properties that I set up with my wife 8 years ago. And yeah, and that's been our story. It's been a business and just enjoying nature, surfing, and obviously with a huge passion for the area that we established our business, and now living abroad for family reasons, because my wife is from here, but still very much connected and going back to Portugal, and eventually we'll go back as well one day. So yeah, that's pretty much sums up my...
Yeah, nice story. And what exactly was it? What's the sort of differences between Porto and Algesur, which is in the Algarve region? It's actually, Algesur is like almost bordering between Algarve and Alentejo, is the Costa Vicentina National Park, if I've pronounced that correctly.
Yep, that's correct.
A super interesting history. What are the main differences between Porto and that area?
Well, Porto is like a very traditional town, full of history, full of culture. There's, the families grow up there, they stay there, they're ingrained in the culture. But and I grew up there in the center of town and close to the ocean and the river, and I loved it. And but I never felt myself as a 100% typical guy from Porto. So I always had this, itchiness about going somewhere else, even though I wasn't disliking Porto. I just felt something else was for me. And so the main differences I felt was I just felt a huge sense of freedom and exploration when I was traveling down and going through the dirt roads and finding these little breaks and beaches and empty without anyone. And at the time I thought, am I the only one that thinks this is amazing and beautiful? Like, why are not more people moving here? Not in the sense that I would want more people to move, but like I felt the odd one out at the time. Not many people from Porto in 2004 would leave, Porto and just move to Algesur. And the opportunities were different. So at the time, I just got fascinated by the nature and by the tradition. And like you said, that mix of Alentejo with the Algarve, it had the Algarve sunshine, the purity of the air, but at the same time had a little splash of Alentejo with the houses and the hills and the green, And so, I just got completely drawn into it. And the surf, obviously, I was surfing a lot at the time. I was really addicted to it. And it was a complete shift. And as I was traveling in the winter times, coming back to Porto, I did not feel like staying in Porto. So I would always feel like just driving down south. But the main differences were in Porto, I would just have a typical life, grow up in my neighborhood, have the same group of 6 friends. And I came from a economically stable family with no issues, nothing. I didn't lack anything. So I could have just stayed in Porto comfortable, Yeah. And but I wanted to live a life of adventure, and I felt that in Algesur.
Yeah, and eight years ago, Algesur was very different as well. I can remember, I think I first lived in Algesur area maybe 12 years ago. I did notice there was so many properties on the market which were pretty good prices for 3-4 bedroom villas with swimming pools and beautiful gardens and the smell of the ocean, particularly Val d'Italia. And there was a lot of expats, should I call them, sort of wanting to sell and wanting to leave. And like you were saying, I was like, okay, why would they want to leave this area? And I used to notice sometimes, they a lot of it was at that time, it was a little bit more difficult to get healthcare. I think also maybe the tax incentives weren't as good with the pensions and things like that. In that 8 years that you were there, it changed considerably. Those very same houses which were for sale for like 170,000 euros are now sort of comfortably selling for 600, 700,000. The prices went up considerably. And I think reflect actually the quality and the standard of what they always should be, I think. And of course, with that influx of people that are now sort of developing properties and moving there, then you have all the ancillary businesses which start up and start to succeed, and the builders, the cafes, the restaurants, and you get a real nice vibe. You get a real good energy moving into a place, which I think Algesur definitely has. It has that. It also has a little bit of a kind of alternative vibe to it in some ways, but then it also is. It has a really nice surf vibe. It also has a nice local vibe as well. I think it's a good balance for sure. And so I agree. I've noticed here that Portugal has actually just announced recently that it really is relative to sort of locals not being able to find properties that they can afford. It's not just locals to the Algarve, it's locals in Lisbon and many other areas of Portugal. It's a hot topic. And it's basically because of Airbnb and a lot of the alojamento local they have here in Portugal. Many people investing in property from outside and from also inside Portugal, investing in property and renting it out on a short-term basis. It's been a very successful model here. It's brought in a lot of business. It's brought in tourism. But with every success, there is always other areas which which it needs to find improvements or assistance and
calibrate.
Things like that. And so the government's passed a sort of an incentive that if you turn your alojamento local, your Airbnb short-term rental into a long-term rental, going to offer tax exemptions. Now, we don't know how long that is for, but that's the kind of thing that people probably will go and seek a lawyer or an accountant to sort of discuss with the tax authorities.
Yes.
But what's your feeling of that? I mean, as somebody who actually sells property and you have investors coming, and I mean, is it a majority of your clients? Do they sort of look to move to Portugal? They buy their dream house and they live there or I mean, are people just sort of buying and renting out and making money and then selling the properties? What's the sort of percentages there, do you think?
Well, initially, the tendency was to buy and to rent short term. So that happened in between 2012, I feel, and like 16, 17. That would be like the core of buyers there. They would buy a holiday home. Airbnb was like kind of booming at the time. And so it was quite easy and there was no offer and the demand was huge. So I think that was a solution for a long time. And because we had a lot of empty properties, it was great because we saw the whole historical center be renovated. We saw life coming back. The country was, and that area in particular, like any area in the interior, was depleted and depressed economically because of 2010 crisis. And so it was a very positive wave of investment that brought a lot of jobs in hospitality, in cleaning, in property management, and in us as well. So we surfed kind of that wave. Tourism brought a lot of people to stay and know the area. And then those people started buying properties and then they started renovating and then they started buying and then renovating and so on. Initially, I think that was the movement, the main movement. It kind of shifted after COVID, I feel. And, COVID made a lot of people consider what they're doing with their lives. Also the advancement in technology and how you can work abroad and how, money gets wired fast. The jobs are online. Things are more, information travels so fast that made things more flexible. And so the second movement we saw, like once the Airbnb offer became kind of more rich and then not in the need so much of growth, was of moving. And so we saw a second wave of people after COVID, during COVID, after COVID, to move to Portugal. And so most of our clients actually move nowadays, and they still do, because prices rose in Algesur, but they also rose back in their country, in the UK or in Germany. So a lot of our buyers also made a lot of money selling their properties, imagine in Germany, or selling a flat in Berlin or a country house somewhere outside of London. And then they would buy a property in Algesur for like a third of the price, 2 kilometers from two beaches, and they would move, or at least part of the year to move. I think regarding the tax exemption, I think it's a good idea. You need to create incentives for people, and this is why liberalizing our economy is important. So you create incentives and other paths, because I feel the issue has always been just having one path. And the issue with rentals is that exactly because our economy is so constrained, Airbnb a property or flipping properties was like the only thing that would work in our economy. And it cannot be the only thing. It has to be just another thing. And when people didn't find solutions in other areas of industries, this is where they turn. So actually, people are just, they're doing what they can to try and improve their financial situation in Portugal. Nobody can blame them. Now, of course, there's a downside to this, which is the lack of rentals, and it is a problem. And I think this solution can be good. And but what we need actually is more construction, not necessarily in my area, in the Natural Park. It's a very specific area. But people need affordable housing. People need to be able to afford. But it's very important for people to understand that prices didn't rose just in Algesur or in Portugal. They rose all around the world in general. Property became like an asset, a transactional asset that raises value a lot of value. So so yeah, that's my view. I think it's a great idea, and I think we are very keen to helping people move. We help a lot of people to get rentals. We actually don't mediate rentals, but whenever people come and ask for rentals, we pass contacts we have. We don't charge people. It's a way of trying to give back a little bit, and because we know that these people eventually will buy one day as well if they like, and if they add value to the community. So we know our business is also based on buyers seeing value in a community, because we don't have a lot of infrastructure in Algesur. So because we don't have a lot of infrastructure, the value comes from intangible aspects, from nature, from cleanness, from the spiritual energy that some clients feel in the area, in the nature, in the coast, in the people. And so we want people to see that value. So if they come and live and they add value by opening a business or growing a family there, for us long term, that's excellent. Excellent. It will return to us in another form.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, no, that's nice. And it's actually, I did notice a lot in the, particularly in the Algarve. You go to a real estate agent, and I would always just sort of speak, just gather a little information. I said, how many people are looking for long-term rentals in here? And they're saying, look, we have like 20 people at least on a waiting list looking for long-term rentals. So there's certainly opportunity there. And I remember at the time thinking, this is actually once one market becomes saturated, new opportunities open up. And I think we should never, we don't want to have too much government interference and things. We want to let the market play out, because, unfortunately, they try to help, but sometimes it just creates barriers.
Exactly. I know, and go ahead.
And I know, for example, like the alojamento local, as soon as we start to get a little bit more, I'm not going to say government interference, but with Airbnb becoming a little bit more regulated, it starts to create issues. It starts to create a little bit of panic in the market. It's like, making this rule change. I have an Airbnb in a big apartment block. It's a residential apartment block. Are they going to say next year that I can't have that? On a short. So,
but then you are creating constraints in a country that actually lives off that industry. So a lot of the people that live, reside in some of those condos are working in the same industry that rents apartments, flips apartments, and so it's kind of taking away some of the only things that still kind of work in Portugal.
Yeah, exactly. I think also, I think once something becomes saturated, there's always there is that a few leaders, who are market leaders who will look and go, oh, there's a big opportunity here. There's a huge market, people wanting long term. Okay, I'm going to turn this building into to affordable housing. There's plenty of buildings to be renovated in Portugal, all over the world.
But the government needs to help. That's where you may ask, and people may ask, then why isn't there more affordable housing? Well, that's where the government needs to help. In terms of bureaucracy of the land, it's impossible for builders or entrepreneurs or anyone, private entrepreneurs that have bought a piece of land and have to wait up to 2 years to start constructing. It's impossible. How can you predict costs of materials, quotes from builders? You don't even know if the builder is going to be there 2 years after, you get the construction license. So the government needs to facilitate the starting point, so builders and private owners make it easy to invest. But that's why you don't have a lot of affordable housing. And also builders, we used to have a category of builders that actually did a nice living in Portugal, just building for the medium class and for affordable housing. But the problem is the cost of materials went so much up, and bureaucracy and licensing and land became so expensive because our urban planning doesn't change, so we have very limited areas to build. And I'm not necessarily saying that we'd have to expand the urban areas in the natural park, but in some areas I think we should, because people deserve to live in the centers, and I think it makes complete sense to condensate urban areas and leave other areas green. And I will hit a point that I want later about this. And I think it's important comparing with New Zealand, because I feel New Zealand is a great example of how to preserve nature and develop a country. And sometimes in Portugal, all people think all our government should do, and people in decision, is sometimes have a little bit of more world in them and see other examples and just copy. You don't need to invent the crystal ball. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So going back to that point, just the builders, a lot of affordable housing did happen because nowadays builders don't make almost any margins by building apartments, because it's difficult to hire quality staff. Then if they have quality staff, it's small teams, and then they have to pay them very much to retain them here and for them not to immigrate, like good Portuguese pedreiro, like good people or young people that need training, especially younger workmen. It's hard to retain them in the rural areas. And so they end up doing the same money in 1 or 2 luxury properties that they would do building 30 apartments. So they have no incentive. So going back to the incentive, you need to create. That's where the government needs to act. They might not necessarily need to build the housing, but they need to create incentives for our industry to be able to see, okay, here's a good opportunity. Maybe I'm not going to be a millionaire by building affordable housing, but it is a great opportunity, because I think a lot of people will be fine without. A lot of builders, entrepreneurs don't necessarily need and want to build luxury housing. They might be happy with doing nice projects for normal medium class people that just need to reside in the country, because if they reside, their families grow there and money comes back into the economy. So it's a win-win for everyone.
It's also it's creating. I think every city or every town, if you go, Lagos is a very good example. There's a big cross section of people there. You have the really big mansions, the huge villas. You also have young people that are trying to find work and are actually servicing a lot of the local industry there. It's very, very difficult to find accommodation. When I first lived in Lagos, I was sharing a big old surgery. It was the doctor's surgery. I was renting a room off a friend of mine. And I think in the peak time of that summer, there was maybe 20 people living in this house. It was a completely crazy old, super old house. And many of the rooms you couldn't live in because it was too noisy, because it was right above the clubs. And it was the only way for people who were working in the restaurants there, or at the time I was starting a surf coaching business. It was the only place I could afford, just to sleep. You couldn't rent an apartment. I rented an apartment in Sagres, and it was pretty reasonable those days. But in Lagos, it was impossible. And I just think it changed. It changed so much. And Lagos, like those big old buildings, there's been some beautiful renovations there.
Fantastic.
Which I think is really good, because it keeps some of the character of the city, but also improving a lot of the interior of the town. And and I think that's probably quite attractive to any investor if they're looking at Portugal to invest in property. It might be quite a unique opportunity for them to come in to renovate some of these bigger, older buildings, divide them into. I'm not going to say inexpensive property, but a more reasonable property for families and for workers to rent, live and buy eventually. I think if there was somebody out there looking at sort of with an investment portfolio, I think looking at Portugal and that kind of idea would be very interesting for them. You would agree, or?
Oh, totally, Justin. Like with the kind of transformation we saw in Lagos. Lagos is a good example, because I think it's Lagos has different sides and faces to it, right? You have the old town, you have the area by the marina, you have Meia Praia. So but the core of the spirit of the town maintained, and now it's developed, but it still has its charm. And I think there's huge opportunities all around. Even in Algesur area, there's still a lot of derelict buildings that have history, character, and people can build, incredibly nice projects that will add value if you keep the character and if you maintain a lot of the tradition in some of the architecture. It's fantastic. It's a win-win for everyone, and that's how that's how Portugal would maintain its authenticity, is by maintaining this character.
And also I think what we did, we actually moved more into a different area. We moved more into the Alentejo because, again, what you could buy for the money was completely ridiculous. Like we could buy a 5-bedroom house with a swimming pool and hectares of land for the same price as an apartment in Aldezur, an apartment in and we're very happy here. It's not to say that it doesn't have its problems. We find it quite hard to find builders to work on the property. Schooling is also an issue, but they are our local school where our son goes to. The facility is absolutely beautiful. They renovated one of the old primary schools with European funding. The teachers are fantastic, and they really make an effort. They actually pay.
Yes,
the local council pays because they had to close our own village school, which is our nearest village, and we have to go to the next village. The council actually pays for a taxi to come and pick our son up, take him to school, and bring him home again. So, what's happening is they're really making an effort to try to get families to stay in the rural areas. We are in very much a rural area. We're 40 minutes from the beach. But in the time that we've been here, which is only 2 years, they've renovated the road literally from our doorstep all the way to my favorite beach.
Amazing.
They've literally made the road. They knocked off like 15 minutes of my travel time to go for a surf.
That's amazing.
Actually now improving the road from our doorstep all the way to Beja, which is one of the major cities here, where we go for jiu-jitsu and gym and all that kind of thing. And
so they're retaining you. They're helping you. They're helping you retain.
Things are happening, and you feel it. It's like everything is getting gradually better. We have Starlink on the roof, so like we have absolutely crazy speed internet, which just means that you can pretty much live anywhere now in rural areas and have Netflix and everything super fast. And I don't see any limitations. Everything seems to be growing and getting better, and
it's never been a better time. It's never been a better time, even though there's difficulties. I think it's never been a better time. People have comfort in their lives easily nowadays, but it should be a reason to incentivize everyone just to believe that things can be done better, not the opposite, And it's easy to get demoralized sometimes with some aspects, but every place has its issues, every single place, not just Portugal. But the beauty, the spirit, and stuff like that you told us about the council, and especially municipalities have a huge impact in terms of retaining families like you that contribute so much, And so I think that's great, and it's great to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, I sort of I speak to a lot of people and friends of my partner Rita, and we speak to, and they're like, Alentejo, I'd love to live in Alentejo. They have like this reminiscing saudade about Alentejo, and I was like, why don't you move back? Why don't you move back? You can work remotely. You can sell your property in Porto or Lisbon and move to Alentejo, have some chickens, have some donkeys, and work remotely. The kids can run. And they're like, I wonder why not. So the next subject I really wanted to talk to you about, and it's kind of related to where we just signed off. You have experience of moving from one place to another and for setting up a business. And I'm sure many people, we talked a little bit about remote working and that kind of thing. But how is it to sort of set up a business in Portugal? How did it feel for you to move from Porto, move to Algesur? And what you looked around and what were the deciding factors to create Guthrie Rocha?
Well, I was working. I was working in as a therapist, as an osteopath for many years.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was for many years. So I studied hospitality and tourism, but then I went to study massage therapy, osteopathy, and I did that for many years in Portugal.
Okay, cool.
For like 8 years before I had the real estate brokerage. So that was great. It was like a trade that allowed me to surf and live this lifestyle. And then obviously I met my wife, I had kids, and I was actually very successful. So I had lots of treatments, lots of patients. I knew a lot of people. I was treating practically like the whole council, everyone.
That was
great.
That was Algesur, right?
Yeah. That was in Algesur. Yeah. So it was great. It was fantastic. I had a great time, but once I got married and I had kids, I was spending like 8, 9, 10 hours in the clinic, and my wife was alone with the kids a lot of time. And so I was getting very tired physically. I wasn't surfing suddenly, because I was a guy hard to say no to people, to treat them, to help them. It was great. I could have kept going that, but I felt I wanted to do a project with my wife as well, and she had marketing degree from New Zealand, and I had people connections. And what we felt at the time was we were starting to deal with foreigners arriving, and they didn't feel understood many times about their context, where they came from and what they wanted. We felt at the time that the industry was a little bit was like sort of stopped in time in some aspects of the client approach. And we wanted to do something different, and we wanted to bring a fresh approach of younger people that understand where these buyers come from, what they need, the challenges they go through, because we were also a family without any support there. And we understood where they came from and their needs. So we felt there was room to make something else. And so when my second child was born, I quit the clinic, which was a shock for hundreds of people. People were like, "What are you doing? You're abandoning me." I couldn't go to a cafe or the town hall that people were like, even after 4 or 5 years, people are like, "Oh, you left us, you abandoned us."
Can you work on the private?
Yeah, crazy. And then but we were determined. I was determined to do this with my wife because we saw potential. We didn't know how good it could be, but to be honest, we were just looking to create a business that allowed us to live there. And if we could live there, that was like the dream, Justin. You know, when people moved to these areas, when I moved in 2004, the dream was like to survive the winter so you could surf, you know? So if you made money in the summer, so that's how I lived for many years, just like working crazy summers, surviving the winter, traveling a little bit, going back to Australia.
Yeah, fully understand.
So when we created this business, we weren't like, "Oh, we're going to be real estate moguls in the town." No, we were like, okay, we see there's room. Let's try and create our own thing. And maybe we can live off this because we have a growing family. I have to pay my bills. And if I really want to live in this paradise place, I better do something about it, you know? And it was just not working for us, me being in a clinic, working 9, 10 hours a day. And so we created the business with our second child. I had a small office that I rented, and I was working alone. She was working at home. She was doing all the marketing, the website, the texts, the inquiries, the ads, and I was doing everything else. So that's where the need came from, because we saw there was room for something else. And initially we even thought about creating having a franchise of some sort. But then I spoke to a really good friend of mine, which is actually a really good surfer as well, from Caparica, and he works in real estate. And he told me at the time, like, "Pedro, no, you're gonna have to put in the work as well. You might as well do it under your name." And so we always felt like, oh, if we put our names, like our surnames in our branding, it gives a little bit more trust, because we are giving our faces
and personal,
and people need trust, because this is a small area. They'll arrive from a plane somewhere, or from Lisbon, from Porto. They don't know anyone, and we will be many times the first door for them to get to know the area. And buying a house is a huge deal. It's a massive thing. And so we wanted for people to feel some confidence, and we didn't have yet the reputation. So we thought, let's lose all we have, which is we try to create a branding that passes trust, and we try to put our knowledge, local knowledge, into place. And so that's what we did. I basically used the tools of my local knowledge from all the contacts I had, because I knew a lot of people that were willing to, once they knew I was a real estate agent, they were like, oh, okay, great. Like, I know you for so many years. I want to work with you. So it was great. It was actually a quite surprising, easy transition for me, because I thought people, initially they were kind of, joking with me for quitting them, for not treating them. But after a while, they felt grateful for the work I had done. So they were willing to give me a shot many times by giving me listings or giving a tip of some aunt or some cousin that they knew. And so we built little by little. It didn't start like huge. We start small. And we just build our way up. And here we are 8 years after. The company still,
Yeah, like I say, we've had a business relationship in the past, and I've always used you guys because your customer service was so proactive, because I get distracted with other things, and I'm always like the administration, and sometimes it's not my strongest point. And you were like, Justin, you do this, and you would be calling me. I wouldn't have to chase you for anything, which was always fantastic. And
thanks. I really appreciate your compliment. It's just an urge we had to. We really suffered. If we don't want people to suffer with the bureaucracy that us Portuguese already suffer, believe me, foreigners sometimes, or people that come from abroad, feel it's difficult. Believe me, for Portuguese is sometimes even more difficult. I know,
you made it feel very, very easy. and very like I didn't have to be reminded of anything. And it was just so different from other experiences that I've had. Just the fact that you were calling me and going, Justin, you need to do this, and let's do this for you.
No, it's great.
I was like, wow, what's this company? This is fantastic.
Well, you were also a very nice client to work. So
good.
It was easy.
And you recommended to me a really good builder as well. Shout out to Paolo. He was fantastic. He came in, did okay, I can do this, and this, and he did all that for me, and it was
it's all about partnerships, long-term partnerships, I believe, as well. Just like you, I know you believe in.
Well, I think you're a point of contact for a huge network there, and I think that's a huge advantage for people coming in, because it's a daunting task, particularly if Portuguese is your second language. Finding
totally
builders and trustworthy people.
I helped people order their school books online. Like, we did that several times. Families would come into the office and just be there using us in our work time to help them order their school books, because we know
I imagine
the stress that we have kids. We know how it means to bring kids to a new place, I think this is great. But we feel this mission because we love to live there. And because we love to live there. Yeah, exactly. We're not just there to make real estate business. We actually love living there. All my staff live there. They move there because they love it, and we have locals and non-locals, and so we share that because you want people to feel it's great, because people
like
give
a big
back
hug
to you in the end.
I always think that when you go to Portugal, and when you move to Portugal, unlike so many other areas, actually, you feel like you get a big hug when you arrive in an area. People are so we had the same thing here we moved to Alentejo, and we go to Beja. We have our jiu-jitsu family, and we have a whole bunch of new friends from then. It was just such a nice, easy transition to a new area. And we just felt like the area just gave us a big hug,
but you also came with a great attitude and energy. And I think so. Portuguese, if they have that, they'll go 100%. You know what I mean? And so you had a great attitude and passion, and a great example of how to understand the country, accepts its flaws, accepts its qualities, but sees the overall picture always. Yeah.
I think it's a nice recipe for moving anywhere in the world. Is
totally.
I do sort of feel sometimes like you move to Portugal because you want to move to Portugal. You don't want to move from your city and take your city and create your city where in Portugal. That's and I find that that's a super important message for people who are coming from other countries. It's like, let's not make a mini country of yours within Portugal. You moved to Portugal because all of the things that you love about Portugal. Leave a lot of your own things behind. Come with an open heart, an open mind. Bring some new ideas and things, but new businesses and new concepts. But let's not expect the culture and the traditions and the language to change for you.
Totally. I agree 100%. It's really the way to happiness, because it's easy to fall in the rabbit hole of comparing when you're in another country and I'm back at home, I have this, I have that. And it is hard to just deliver yourself to a new culture and embrace. But if you don't deliver yourself, you will never discover what you haven't felt yet.
Yeah.
And if you do that, it's going to surprise you, and it's going to actually give you opportunity to influence a lot of people, bring a lot of ideas, like I'm sure you are doing in the Alentejo. With all these contacts you are making, you are creating this network, and people are absorbing, Justin's life experience and everything you've done and you've seen. And that's how you make the area more rich as well. And Portuguese are open to learn as well.
It's super interesting. There's so many beautiful things here in the Alentejo. I keep going on about it, but the castles, the tourism potential here is absolutely completely crazy, and just being discovered now. I'm going to talk to a winery in the Alentejo, because, as you know, the wine up here is amazing. I'm going up to a vineyard, and this place is fantastic.
Yes.
Wow.
There's amazing places. I have actually some connection to the Alentejo. I used to spend my childhood in Torrão, which is
that's really close to me.
Well, between Torrão and Alcáçovas, which is afterwards.
Yeah.
So my grandparents had a farm, a cattle farm there. And so I used to spend my childhood there. Eventually the family had to sell the property because it was impossible to maintain nowadays, but I have my memories of Alentejo are just like the heat, the sunsets, and having the best watermelons in the world, It's beautiful. It's amazing.
Fantastic. Right, Pedro, thank you very much. I think we need to wrap it up there. What a really good podcast. It's such a nice opportunity to spend some time with you. And I look forward to having more conversations. And I hope our audience really enjoyed listening to everything you have to say about property in Algesur, moving, community, all that kind of stuff. I'd like to also say thank you to the jingle that you hear at the beginning, at the end of this podcast. Band of Four. It's a Swiss band. Very cool indie music. You should check them out on Instagram. The links I shall put on the website, which will take you to their different platforms where you can hear their music.